On behalf of our team at HBK, I'd like to welcome you to Why Manufacturers Must Have a Business Data Destruction Policy with HBK Manufacturing Solutions, Amy Reinalt, with special guests from Northern Shore Services, Kevin and Jennifer Lamar. Our session is scheduled for 60 minutes and is being recorded. Please note that all attendees are set up in listen-only mode. If you'd like to submit a question to our panel, please use the question box in the GoToWebinar control bar. A copy of the presentation materials is available for download in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control bar. At the end of this session, you'll be prompted to complete a survey and provide us with feedback on the presentation. For more information and insights, please visit our manufacturing section of our insights page at hbkcpa.com/insights. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Amy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our webinar today on business data destruction policies for manufacturers. My name is Amy Reinalt, and I am the co-director of our HBK Manufacturing Solutions group. I'm really excited to introduce our two special guests today, Jennifer and Kevin Lamar of Northern Shores Services. Throughout the presentation, you'll hear their expertise in this area, and it's also interesting to note that both Jennifer and Kevin have some manufacturing experience as well. So they've been a part of your world, they understand the challenges that you face, and they certainly have geared this presentation to focus on clients like you, manufacturers. Now, over the COVID period, we've seen a lot of cybersecurity concerns. And I think the data destruction policy goes right along with those concerns, especially as manufacturers may be adopting new technologies in Industry 4.0 and all of those kinds of things. You know, we have concerns about attacks. We have concerns about hacks, basically others getting our information. But the data destruction policy, whether you are completely electronic, whether you still have some hard copy data, this is going to pertain to everyone. So we think this is a great topic, an exciting topic to bring to you just before the holidays and likely the time when you may be purging records from previous years. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Kevin Lamar, the VP of Business Development for Northern Shore Services. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amy, and hopefully you could hear me okay.
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Amy and Hillbarth and King for inviting Jennifer Lamar and I from Northern Shore Services to assist with this presentation. Yes, it is ironic and a welcome enhancement to the presentation that both Jennifer and I have manufacturing experience. A little bit about us, and I know it was on the previous screen. But, Jennifer has 25 years of experience in the manufacturing industry with a focus on analytical chemistry. And I am CFO for a metal processor in Cleveland, Ohio. And my background is in manufacturing, commercial banking, and corporate accounting. If you're wondering why Jennifer and I started Northern Shore Services, it actually happened when our company had some meetings with some senators and with the House in DC regarding recycling in our industry. And through that, we noticed the need for a continued focused effort with small and medium-sized businesses on the data destruction or data management standpoint, and that's how Northern Shores arrived. Michelle, the next slide that talks about our focus, simply what we do at Northern Shores. And the reason why talking about our company is important is, number one, to introduce ourselves, but number two, a number of data destruction, IT recycling companies are similar in this regard. And if you ever wondered what a company that is in that industry niche does, that's why we're profiling that now. But what we focus on is solutions to our clients in order to provide a reliable and secure way to sanitize their data that's normally contained on some unwanted media. Michelle, the next slide. Here we talk about our approach, and very simply, we work with our clients to determine if they have either an on-site at their location or an off-site at our location need for data destruction. And then we talk to them about custom solutions. And Jennifer, as she gets to her part, will talk about that. The custom solutions help us tailor make our service for what they need in the project at hand. The reporting is really crucial, and Jennifer will talk about that later as well. And then we make sure with our clients that they're compliant with whatever needs they would have from a regulatory standpoint. In the end, the goal is to provide secure data destruction. And Michelle, the next slide in our services, simply we work with data erasure, and we'll talk some more about that. And that's the erasing of data that would be stored on various media. The physical destruction, clients require at times that in addition to the data being erased, that it be physically destroyed. The reporting, although we have some standard types of reports, they're also client specific based on what they require to have in their audit files. And also an interesting part of this at the end of that page, number 3, is we try to understand what our client would want as far as the number of locations and where they would want this to transpire as far as the data erasure. And that involves chain of custody if the hard drives are being transported. It also involves whether we should perform this service at our client's office or somewhere else. And that's an interesting point because to frame that, you could have a shredder truck arrive at your company's location in order to destroy the hard drives. But if you want to witness that, your client needs to stand in the parking lot. And if that occurs in February in Northeastern Ohio, that makes for a difficult service. An option, as we'll talk about later, is actually destroying the drives in the office of the client in their comfort and could fit into their business plan as well. So that's an interesting point to that. Michelle, if we could advance to the OCC issue. This involves Morgan Stanley, and it actually sets the tone for the importance of this subject matter. The Morgan Stanley is obviously not a manufacturer, a financial advisory house that stores many of personal client data. This situation is a nightmare, and it's a nightmare, and it's actually, I think, a great business case to analyze on how all of us as manufacturers and companies should manage our data. Quickly, what had happened is Morgan Stanley had 2 data centers that they asked a data destruction company to go in and manage the project. So they went ahead and contracted with another company to wipe the data and then take all the IT assets and sell them to another company. Now, obviously, Morgan Stanley didn't know that. They contracted with the first company. Well, when the second company sold the assets to a third company, that third company was under the impression that they were all wiped and destroyed as far as a data standpoint, but they were not, and they sold those assets on the secondary market. So people like Amy, Michelle, or I would buy a computer online, and we knew it was refurbished and we got a discounted price. We would turn the power on and start to load our programs, only to find Morgan Stanley private client data on those hard drives. So although Morgan Stanley is not a manufacturer, it's a great example as what companies should be aware of what could happen if a project could go wrong. And there's ways to work through that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Michelle, the next slide. There's a major company that does high volume data destruction, and that company is Steracycle. And there's some quotes that they recently provided at an industry group that said that they are seeing that companies are becoming more aware of this issue, and that that threats to information security obviously will continue to grow, and they have serious impacts. I think what's very important is in that first quote, safeguarding confidential information impacts the health and well-being of the bottom line and their brand for a company. That's very important because, sometimes we think as manufacturers that our data is not that sensitive. But if there is a breach and our customers find out about it, it draws a question whether us as manufacturers are competent in our work if we allow a data breach. Now that's a stretch because we all do a good job with our clients, and a data breach would have no effect on how we service our clients. But it creates this negative noise that detracts from us creating revenue as manufacturers. So it's also important to know your data inside and out and how to proactively prepare to protect it. With that, Michelle, we could present the first CPE checkpoint question.
If you're interested in receiving CPE credit for today's webinar, please answer the following question on the screen.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. As we work with our clients and talk about their business cycle and what they need from a project execution standpoint for data destruction, the question comes up, what created this project? Sometimes it occurs based on introduction of new technology, although the new technology is a lot harder to get these days because of logistical issues and the availability of chips and processors from other countries. But as we introduce new technology into our marketplace, what do you do with the old technology, the old IT assets, the old hard drives? So that's something to consider. If you're upgrading your existing equipment, which is similar to what I mentioned before, that requires us to use an analysis to find out if we're managing the project correctly from a data destruction standpoint. Changes in staffing levels and office locations, especially what we've gone through in the last 12 months, that requires us to take a second look at that. Also, compliance with our own corporate IT policies. Sometimes a lot of our clients do not have IT policies regarding data destruction and IT recycling, and we can help with that as a number of consultants can, and staying in compliance with that is important. And it's all about managing risk and being more efficient. I know in our businesses, our number one focus should be revenue and taking care of our team. And an IT project can be a distraction if it's not handled right. So that's what our presentation is about today. And then the fourth point about revisions to business models. Sometimes an acquisition can take place. A lot of times it can, and that requires IT to become involved to help with either the expansion of the business platform or some consolidation. So therefore, it's important to focus on that IT policy and best practice. And Michelle, if you can advance to the next slide. These are the benefits of data destruction and asset recycling. And not to read through each block, but here are the main points. Number one, you're looking at space. You want to create valuable space for storage of other items, not just IT assets. So therefore, that's important to incorporate in the project, as well as conditions. You want to eliminate any environmental or safety concerns. Security issues. Security issues are important so that it prevents a data breach. You also want to minimize time as far as moving assets from one room to another room if they're obsolete, and also convenience. As you're assembling a data destruction and an IT recycling program or project, you want to make sure that it's convenient for all parties involved because of the soft costs involved with that. Michelle, on the next page, we talk a lot about cybersecurity these days in a variety of other presentations, and Hilbarth & King has done a great job in that area of bringing this issue to the forefront. It's interesting when you talk about your data being in an active life cycle and being able to protect it as an ongoing part of our business. But then you move from that to an end of life, and the end of life part of the IT assets and hard drives, and how to make sure that the file deletion and also the data destruction is occurred in an appropriate manner. A number of our clients believe that just deleting files, formatting, or resetting the computer allows the data to not be accessible, and that's not appropriate. There's a number of ways that data can be accessed. And if you think about it, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you move assets from department to department, and you have to make sure that certain spreadsheets, certain PDFs, certain files are not on hard drives that you would want other departments to see. One of the comments that we get a lot is our information is stored on the cloud, not on our hard drives. So really there's not a need for a data destruction process or service. I think all of us on this call could look around the room and probably say that all of us store something on our desktop or our hard drive that's not on a server or on a shared folder in the cloud, and that's the risk. Saving any tax data, profit and loss data, any customer lists, and then moving that to that hard drive to use in another department, such as engineering or repair and maintenance. That creates a risk that data could be accessed by someone within our company, in your company, or outside of your company. So that's why analyzing the data and where it's stored is very important. And Michelle, the next slide. These terms and definitions are good to keep in your files if you're ever going to take on a data destruction project, and Jennifer will talk more about that. But here we talk about the difference between media and data, and the differences between overwriting and destruction, and also the different type of hard drives. You have the older hard disk drives versus the solid state drives, and those need to be handled differently. There are clients that still have magnetic tape out there that has data stored on, and that needs to be handled a certain way as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Lamar. She's our CEO and president of Northern Shore Services, and she was going to talk on developing your own policy.
Thank you, Kevin. I guess we'll start with an introduction to where it all begins, which would be the meat and potatoes of your policy, which is the NIST Special Publication 800-88 Rev 1, Guidelines for Media Sanitization. And it certainly is a mouthful, so we'll just refer to it as NIST from here on in. NIST Rev 1 was published by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies in December of 2014. In general, it provides instructions for the acceptable media sanitization methods, but it serves as a guideline for the development of an organization's data destruction policy. The objective of NIST is to help with decision-making when media requires disposal, reuse, or will be leaving the control of an organization. Organizations should develop and use local policies to make effective risk-based decisions. Therefore, NIST says it's the responsibility of the information owner to identify data categories and confidentiality levels and determine the level of media sanitization required for their organization. Information disposition decisions can occur throughout the information timeline, but they're usually most intense during the end of life phase. As mentioned, there are several methods that can be used to sanitize media. To decide on the appropriate method for your organization, you should look at the following 4 steps. According to NIST, you should categorize the security level of the information, assess the media, evaluate the risks, and determine the future of the media. If some of those are easier said than done, a simple statement like the first one, categorize the security level of the information, requires an awful lot of effort on the part of an organization, but these are the basic guidelines they recommend you follow. The selected method you choose should be appraised according to cost, environmental impact, and other factors, but in the end, you have to choose what best mitigates the risk to an unauthorized disclosure of information. That will always be the goal. Next, please. So the following are some environmental factors to consider when making your decision. First one's type and storage capacity of your media. CDs, hard drives, solid states, they all require different methods of physical destruction. The time needed, say, to erase a 2 terabyte hard drive is much greater than the time needed to erase a 64 gig HDD. Another consideration is the security and confidentiality of the data. And this is a very important one. Does your data include personnel files, HR records, maybe financial information, medical records, so on and so forth? Also consider the physical location of the media. Is it located in a secure, controlled access area? Are there power requirements that have to be met? And this last one's kind of interesting. Are your drives loose or are they contained in computer units? This is important because obviously it's much easier for somebody that is on your site to walk out with one of your loose drives, especially something like a solid state drive, which is very small, versus having them walk out with your desktop units. So you obviously would maybe notice somebody doing the latter, but not necessarily the former. Then we look at the personnel performing the method. Do you have current staff on site who can perform the data destruction, or should you consider the task to be performed by maybe an outside contractor to take that responsibility and time off your hands? Next, please. So the volume of media that you have to be sanitized is a consideration, because especially this is interesting if you're way behind on this whole process. So you could have an office containing 10 drives perhaps, but you could also have a storage area somewhere in your manufacturing facility that could possibly even contain hundreds of drives. And this is more common than you would think. We see it happen all the time. Then there's the availability of equipment. So does your organization have access to the correct tools to perform the data sanitization? You also have training level of personnel. Is the person responsible for this task performing the method, are they familiar with the process and do they understand how to perform the sanitization? There's time required for the process. Your data erasure for, say, a solid state can be accomplished, if you're lucky, oftentimes less than 5 minutes, which sounds like a great idea, but the same process on a large capacity HDD, like say a 2 terabyte or some of the 1 terabyte, the larger HDDs out there, erasing one of those could easily take several hours. Not all that time would be active time. You don't have to actually sit there for several hours, but you would have to check on the process many times during that time period. Then there's the total cost of the sanitization. So you want to consider the cost of the equipment and the software, but not only that, you have to consider the cost of properly training your employees and the disposal costs associated with destroying. If you physically destroy your media, you would have to have somewhere to have that waste end up, and you would have to pay for that, more likely. So I think we are on the poll question number 2. Okay, so here's some additional considerations for your policy. The first one's control of media. It's an important factor and that influences your sanitization decision is your responsibility of the control over and the access to your media. So the media control is transferred whenever your media is being, say, returned as part of an end of lease agreement, or it's being sold or donated for reuse outside of your organization. Those are times when you have to really consider what policy you have in place and does it cover these aspects of your everyday operation. The other thing is to consider is another consideration would be the data protection level. So even within your organization, you could have different data protection policies. So for example, most of you probably in your companies have an engineering department and a sales department. So the sales personnel may not need to access detailed technical data, and the engineers probably don't have a need to access personal information of your company's customers. Therefore, there may be internal applications to your policy that covers your different internal departments. Next, please. So basically, NIST outlines responsibilities, and like most things, tasks senior managers with creating and maintaining an effective program for their organization. The main focal point of this is that they have to ensure that adequate resources are available to identify and locate the information. And resources could be in the terms of funding and personnel, that type of thing. So it outlines, NIST outlines the roles of managers. And if you want to get into the actual meat and potatoes of that, it has a section in NIST that will define different roles. There's quite a few roles defined, and most organizations aren't fortunate enough to have multiple people to fill those roles. So usually it boils down to a few people filling multiple roles. And then, of course, the data end users are tasked with knowing and understanding the confidentiality of the data associated with their projects. And they have to know how to handle that data properly. So it starts at the top and it ends up affecting everybody in your organization, basically. Here's a few definitions quickly that actually define the basis of the NIST program. Clear, purge, and destroy are the actions that are taken to sanitize the media. The categories are defined as such. So clear is the first, probably lowest level to be considered, and it applies logical techniques to sanitize data for protection against simple, non-invasive recovery techniques. Typically, this involves rewriting or overwriting your drives. Purge applies the physical or logical techniques that render target data unrecoverable using state-of-the-art laboratory methods. And finally, destroy renders the target data unrecoverable using state-of-the-art techniques, and it also results in the inability to reuse the media. So factors in your decision-making process, you start by identifying what types of data are stored on a device in your organization. Then you choose the techniques that ultimately preserve the confidentiality of the data. You also want to consider how long the data would remain sensitive. So this is an interesting point, and a lot of times people retain things forever, but that may not necessarily be so. It depends on what information is on your media. Purge and clear can sometimes be a more appropriate choice than destroy if you're factoring in environmental concerns or the need to reuse the media and the cost of replacing your devices. The risk decision, though, should include consequences of the information being disclosed and the cost of the information retrieval and the cost of sanitization. Now, this last step is important because it kind of ties in a little bit with what Kevin was talking about the Morgan Stanley issue. So that obviously was a very costly lesson to be learned, in that if the data should be breached, the consequences are extremely severe. Next. Okay, so now we talk about documentation according to NIST, and this is a very important step. So once the sanitization is complete, you need a certificate of media disposition. The certificate in this case could be either a hard copy or an electronic record, and the amount of information it contains depends on the confidentiality level of the data that was sanitized. But the certificate should include the following details at a minimum. The media information, so that's your basics, manufacturer, model type, and serial number, which is extremely important. The system information, so if you had an asset tag on a computer and you took the drive out of it, you might want to track it that way, so you could correlate the drive back to the unit it came from. The sanitization description, which are the definitions we discussed earlier. Sanitization methods, and we will talk more about those in detail a little further in the presentation. The verification method, so anytime you erase a device of, say you have a hard drive, a solid state, what have you, you have to verify that process. You want to add the date, time, and location of the method when it took place. And lastly, the name, title, and the signature of the person performing the sanitization. So these are just brief examples. I won't go through, and we threw them up here though. There's some examples of the documentation we provide at Northern Shores. And this first one is a sample physical destruction report. This is created by us for when drives are physically crushed. And this has the information we talked about on it earlier, including serial numbers. This is a sample data destruction report. And this is when the data undergoes erasure or overwriting, wiping it's often called. This document is automatically generated by our erasure software program. Okay. Then here are a couple examples of the sample destruction certificates that, these are just samples of certificates of physical destruction and data destruction that we provide. And again, I want to point out here that the format is as important as the content. So your certificates may look different in some cases, but it should have the information that we discussed. So at Northern Shores, we usually use these certificates in combination with the reports to provide a complete package of all the information you would need for your files in case your regulators should ask for proof of this. Okay, next, please. So I wanted just to talk a little bit about the appendices of NIST, because there's some of them that are probably helpful when you're trying to navigate the document and prepare your own data destruction policy. The first one I wanted to mention was Appendix A, and Appendix A is a great tool to use. It's very, very lengthy, but it contains a wealth of information. And what it does basically is it divides your assets according to type. So it talks about Android phones, and it talks about solid state drives, and it talks about copiers and printers. And so it's really worthwhile to just take this part of the document and review it if you want to start on your policy. It's not often easy reading, but they do divide all of the various methods into the clear, purge, and destroy, like we talked about, and it tells you for your specific device how you proceed to do one of those, choose one of those different means. Then Appendix B defines terms used in the guide, and finally Appendix G provides a NIST sample of the certificate of sanitization, so that you could see what they're talking about. Basically, it's the form version of what we talked about earlier, the information to be included. So it's a lot of information. NIST it requires quite a bit of time to kind of look through. It is very well accepted in most industries and most circles. But so how does all of that translate into a real case scenario for your company? So you could say, this is great, but what does it mean for me? So I suggest starting with an outline for your procedure based on how you do all your other procedures, and you would start from the beginning. So some components to include in your policy would be some of the following. It's recommended to have your purpose, your scope, your objective. Depending on what your regular format looks like for a procedure, you probably, in all likelihood, in your manufacturing facility, have one of these three items to begin your SOPs. Then you could maybe include a discussion on your personal regulatory requirements for your organization. What is the driving force, the driving factors behind your particular industry that requires you to have this policy in place? Then you want to look at data categories and confidentiality levels. This is very specific to define these for your organization. And this is probably, I would have to say, one of the most difficult parts of the policy, because you have to figure out what types of information you handle and what types of people should have access to it. Then you could outline the roles and responsibilities based on title or position of the individuals. This is helpful, and this does have a helpful, like I described earlier, they have a helpful section that defines roles and responsibilities. And again, you may not have an individual for each role, but it's a good place to start when you're defining who's basically responsible for what aspect of your policy. Then we have media control, which is your inventory and custody procedures, assuming that you have some, which hopefully you do. And we'll talk more about that, where to get started on that. There's media destination. So what are the options that your company uses in this case? Do you have a lot of media that you return to your leasing agent? Do you use things mostly internally for reuse and transfer between departments? Does your organization believe in donating your media, or do you want to recycle it? So if you have all of those options, you should consider having a little bit of a description of each. And if you don't use all of them, obviously limit to what you choose to do. Then there are file backup requirements, and this is probably something you already have as part of your organization, but that would be a good thing to include in your policy. And then you would include your data destruction methods once you determine what they are, and you could explain the procedures you have chosen in this case. So they might not all be the same. Some hard drives may need to be erased, while others may need to be destroyed physically, depending on their end use. So that's something that you need to consider. Then you have your documentation, your record keeping and retention. And so in this case, who would maintain your certificates and your reports? How long would they be retained? Those type of things could be covered in your policy. There's policy enforcement. So what is the frequency of the reviews of the policy, and when will it be updated, so on and so forth. So it's kind of a policy enforcement document control function. And then finally, lastly, in this section is incident reporting. And while you would hope that this does not happen, that you would ever have to come to this step, and that's the point of having this policy, it is also, though, a good idea to include in your policy how and who would handle the reporting of an incident if it were to be needed. It's a very important step. So then we have the final slide in this section is practical applications. And I firmly believe that your policy should address the creation and maintenance of an inventory list to track your devices. So if you're trying to figure out where to start with all this, that's kind of a good place to start. And it's likely you may already have an inventory list. I'm not saying this is easy to put together, but especially if you have a lot of devices over many departments and even several locations, but the inventory list is a great place to start. So it should include items such as your device type, whether you have hard drives, loose hard drives, whether you have laptops, whether you have tablets, desktops, all of those type of things. And then it should be maybe in a spreadsheet format might be good. You could list your manufacturers, the models, the serial numbers, they talk about life stage cycle. So where is this unit? Is it actively in use? Is it in storage for reuse? Is it in storage to be donated or destroyed? So it's important to know, what stage it's in as far as its information life cycle goes. The location physically, is it, in office number 22? Is it in the warehouse? Is it on the manufacturing floor? And then the ownership details, who's responsible for those units. And then finally, this is just, everyone knows how to define a device, but it's just an kind of a reminder that you have desktops, laptops, tablets, and everybody thinks of that. But there's also, other things like servers, switches, your smartphones that are company owned, your printers. All of these things obviously have information on them that would be company owned. And that's in addition to your hard drives, the magnetic tapes, flash media, so on and so forth. So sometimes a lot of these smaller items might be overlooked in your policy, but they should definitely be included. So just to summarize that if you start with an inventory list, that would be a good basis to build the rest of your policy on, and then add the other components that we talked about previously.
At this time, we have the third poll question up on the screen now for you.
Thank you, Michelle. And Jennifer did a great job of walking through the developing your own policy and the NIST regulations. That content could be mind-numbing, but it's certainly very important to understand at least the foundation, the guidance, the compliance, the best practice. As owners of companies, managers of manufacturing organizations, you look at this project and your eyes roll and you say, this is bigger than I ever thought, and how do you even get started? I think you choose the right vendor. Hopefully you'd consider Northern Shore Services, and lay the problem out, the challenge, the project, and then as you do with all your other projects, have a vendor become a consultant and help you get over the bridge and get the project started under best practices and under compliance and under your own policy. So it's not as bad as you think, but getting the right people sitting around the table is important. Probably you're wondering, well, what does a data wiping, data erasure unit look like? And if you look at this slide on the far right is an example of a data erasure unit, and it's similar to a laptop. I know at Northern Shores we have 3 or 4 of these units that could fit in an overhead compartment of a plane or fit in the back of your car. And what happens is the drives, they're either in enclosures, which are like metal cabinets that are attached by some cables. And the software that's in these units, they provide the algorithms that write to the drive based on the different technique that's required for the project. It's very interesting, and as Jen had mentioned, with some of the drives based on the age and the size, they could erase very quickly or could take a while to erase. Jen had also mentioned an example of the overwriting report that comes in a PDF, and it's interesting as a data destruction company, you try from a marketing standpoint to put your company's template on and put some notes on the report and have our own signature on the report. And the software causes you not to do that because they don't want you altering that data. So the software is very Loctite as far as providing the erasure process, capturing the data for you that can be used with a certificate, but very limited in what input the user can put on that report. And that's important if you want the project to go successfully. The disadvantage with wiping or overwriting is that it's time consuming and, as we mentioned, could be a little complex, but finding the right organization to handle that for you is key. Michelle, the next slide, please. There are some discussions about degauzing related to hard drives, and all that is a magnet that's placed over the drive that ends up causing the drive not to be used again in the future. The issue with that, whether it's a handheld magnet or you put the drive in a box that exerts this magnetic field around the drive, there's no visual feedback if that drive is thoroughly been erased or no reports that come out from that action. So it is a form of physical destruction. It's out there. The traceability related to that could be limited. And Michelle, the next slide, please. We talked about this earlier regarding shredding. Clients sometimes require shredding to occur. Witnessing the actual process can be a little messy because of the dust and that exerts from that. Also, it can be costly depending upon how many drives you need done. And also you have to make sure that the particle size is accurate because of the NIST requirements regarding shredded drives. So Michelle, on the next slide, another way to address physical destruction is crushing. And there's an example of one of our crusher units. It has a wedge in the center that exerts 7 tons of force within a drive. That's normally done after the drive's been erased. Some of our clients only require their drives to be crushed because of their own internal policy. That drive is about 90 pounds, comes in a case similar to a suitcase, and you're able to bring that to an office, set it on a desk, and with very little noise, you're able to crush drives there at our client location. It's a neat thing to witness. It's very efficient, it's very effective. It doesn't require a lot of operator training, although the visual inspection and the technique related to the overall project is very important. So that's an example of a portable crushing unit. And Nicole, I'm sorry, Michelle, as we wrap up the session, just a couple points I wanted to bring out is that as a company, we feel that data destruction is very important and that a policy should be put in place, and getting some educated vendors around the table to help you with that is really important. No different than on the personal side, the story that resonated with me that allowed us to start Northern Shore Services was a contact that I know has a retail collection point for electronic IT assets. And on a Saturday morning, he had a gentleman drop off a smart TV to be recycled. After the client, that retail customer left, they plugged the smart TV in to the power and found out there was 50 or 60 emails on that smart TV. And that individual that dropped off the TV also owned a company that was involved in an acquisition. And there was actually a number of emails there regarding an acquisition that was pending, to include financial statements, forecasts, and projections, and actually the agreement related to the sale and acquisition of the company. So it's very important that we as individuals, as well as business owners and operators, know that data is everywhere, and that to take a second look as how it can be destroyed, removed before our IT assets are disposed of. And it's getting worse with our leased vehicles and the uploading of contacts to and emails to phones, even rental cars. It's getting worse with TVs and refrigerators and alarm systems. Everything's tied to the internet. So if this presentation does anything for the audience, definitely on our consumer world as well as our business world, it's important to be sensitive to that. So on behalf of Jennifer and I at Northern Shore Services, we want to thank you for being here in attendance and giving us this opportunity. And special thanks to Hilbarth and King and Amy and Michelle as well. So Amy or Michelle, I didn't know if you had any other questions you would like us to go over.
We did get a couple questions submitted from the audience. The first question is, what data destruction methods are most often chosen by your clients, and what factors drive these choices?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a very good one. Actually, speaking from our client base, most of our clients go for a two-step process. So a lot of the drives and the assets that we have come in that have drives in them, they ask us to remove the drives and then do the erasure method, which is the overwriting with the unit that you had saw and the special software. And then we verify that erasure. And then we, in most cases, usually take those drives from our customers and we crush them to destroy them and bend the platters or what have you. Or in the case of solid state drives, we puncture them with multiple times with holes. So we personally have very few customers who have their drives erased and then returned to them. We often, though, do have customers who skip the erasure part altogether and they just go for the method of physical destruction. Obviously, doing the two-step process is the most secure, but again, it depends on what you want to do with your media when you're done with it. If you want to reuse your hard drives within your organization, then of course you would not want them destroyed. So, hope that answers that.
The next question that came in is, what are some of the most unique situations you've encountered regarding data destruction?
Yes, there's always interesting situations that come up. We have some government unit clients that at times take us to a back room that's filled with IT assets, and they candidly look at you and say, we have no idea what's here. We really don't know how to handle this. Can you take care of this project for us? And we do a detailed inventory of everything in that room. We go through the data destruction, which is number one, and record all the serial numbers of the hard drives, provide the certificates and the reports that Jennifer laid out. And what that process actually did is document the fixed assets that were being disposed of, so the government entities could present that information to county accounting areas in order to make sure that the accounting records agree with what was disposed of. So I think that's not a unique situation, but it is common, and it's because we're all focused on the critical things in our business, and sometimes data destruction isn't one of them, or IT recycling. Another interesting job we had is we had a client in New York City that asked us to destroy some drives, and you have to visualize this. They were on the 25th floor of a large building. They understood they needed to take the drives in a freight elevator to the street level and witness a shredder truck shredding those drives right there in Manhattan. And obviously you can imagine the complexity in trying to arrange that, as well as the risks. Through a portable crushing unit, we were able to handle that data destruction in their office, and therefore those drives never left the premise of the office, and that assisted them in that project. So I think that's an interesting twist on how to get creative, following best practices, and at the same time get the job done, and honoring the expectations of the project in general. So I don't know, Jen, if you had any other situations.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Are there other questions, Michelle? Or
that was our last question. Thank you so much, Kevin and Jennifer, for all that great information. On this last slide, you can see Jennifer and Kevin's contact information, as well as mine. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Otherwise, enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday. Our next webinar will be Wednesday, December 15th and we will be talking about some of the new legislation that has been passed, some tax planning tips for manufacturing companies, and other information that's critical as we approach the new calendar year. So we look forward to seeing everyone then. Have a great day. Thanks so much.